In this video, you're going to learn how to create this 3D hover reveal component in Framer without writing a single line of code. We're going to be using variants, components, interactions, and even variables for this project. So if you want to practice those features, this will be a perfect exercise for you. So my name is Nandi, this is Framer University, and let's get started. So here we are in this Framer project. I will leave this as a remix link in the description, so you can go on the left panel to the starter page, and you're gonna find all of the assets that we'll use, the logos and the images, so you can start building with me according to this tutorial. So yeah, let's get started. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna press F on my keyboard, and I'm gonna draw this frame here. Now we have to make sure that this frame is actually the same aspect ratio as one of these images. So I will just paste this right here, and then I'm gonna just copy and paste these sizes. So this is the width and this is the height. Then we can delete this image, and this frame will actually be white. And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to lock this aspect ratio here for this image. This basically means is that now if I start scaling this up, the aspect ratio will nicely be kept. So it is perfect. So now I'm going to rename this frame to maybe content. And then I'm going to also turn this into a stack by pressing this layout button. So now we have the base of our little component. As you can see, if we jump into our browser, we have the rawmaterials.com. And as you can see, this was the inspiration for the effect. And we will actually be getting the assets, the images, and the text and logos from this website. So now we can get the information from the first card. It's 7-Eleven mobile, product innovation, and this first logo. So let's type in these. So I'm gonna just hit T on my keyboard and click. So 7-Eleven mobile. I'm gonna make sure that it's 20 pixels in size, maybe a little less letter spacing, and medium in weight. So now it's perfect. I'm gonna select the content frame and then set the distributions to start, to make sure that it starts at the beginning, and maybe I'm gonna have 24 padding on the left and on the right. We can have 0 on top. And then we have the name of the project, perfect. I usually set user select none on text layers if it is within an interactive element, just to make sure that when we preview the site and we click the text, it is not selectable. So now we have this, we also need the logo there. So let me just grab the logo, Command and C, paste it in here. And then to make sure that this logo is on the right and the text is on the left, we can just set the distribute now instead of start to space between, meaning that these elements will be distributed like this within the content frame. So we only need this last thing, product innovation, in the center. So I'm just gonna duplicate this text. As you can see, it's not completely centered like this. So we'll just select it, set it to absolute positioning so we can move it around freely. As you can see, if I use the arrow keys, I can just move it. If I press Option H and V, I can completely center it within the content frame. And then this will say product innovation, I think, product innovation. We'll have a little bit smaller size here, maybe 14, and we can increase the letter spacing just a bit, and also this weight, and then maybe 60% for the transparency. So now we have all the information for our little project card, and now we can start setting up the 3D part of it. Now for this, we're gonna use 3D transforms in Framer. If you don't know how to use these, I have a free crash course on them. Just make sure to go down to the description and watch that if you cannot follow some of the things that I'm gonna talk about here. So we're gonna grab our first image. So let me just go here to the starter. You're gonna have it on this page, and then let me just paste it in right here. I'm gonna rename it to image, and then Command and X, and I'm gonna paste this within the content frame. And we will have this as an absolutely positioned element. We will center it. We will have the locked aspect ratio here as well. Maybe we can also just deselect this lock here, since if we set this to 100% here on the width and on the height as well, then this basically will mean that it will get the size of its parent, which is the content, which already has the aspect ratio locked, so we get the correct size from there. So let's select this image. I'm gonna also make sure to pin it to the top, and then let's set this height back to 100%. So now we can wrap this in another frame. So I'm gonna press Command and Enter, and this will wrap it in a frame. I'm gonna call this peak. This will be kind of the part that peaks as we hover over this object. So now I think we have to set this back to 100 in terms of height. And now we have to somehow make sure that it is transformed in 3D space. So let's do that. We're going to select the peak here. We're going to go to the right panel, transforms, and then we're going to click rotate 3D, and we're going to rotate along the X. That's perfect. And then we're going to also add a origin to this. We're going to set the Y to 0%. So it's going to be transformed from the top. We cannot really see any perspective distortion here. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the content here, and we're going to specify this 3D space here. We're going to add preserve 3D and perspective here. Again, if you don't really know what are these, just make sure to watch the crash course on 3D transforms. The link is in the description. So now we can clearly see what is going on with this peak. We can go back to it and we can further, specify this X rotation here. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically have it on -90, because, now we cannot see it, but if we then move to the content frame and transform that with a 3D rotation along the X, we're going to see this. So this is exactly what we need. However, there's a small issue, and that's the fact that this image is now flipped. And that's exactly why we've wrapped it in this other frame, which is called peak. Because now what we can do is we can go within and select the image, which doesn't have any rotations or transforms whatsoever. And so if we counter this flip effect here along the X-axis, we can flip it back, and so now it faces us. So now we have everything. We can set this content to 0x rotation, and we're going to also add origin to this to make sure that it transforms from the bottom. So now the Y will be 100. So as you can see, as I change the X, it is basically rotating from this bottom line. So let's set the X to 0. And now basically we are done with the basic setup. That's all we have to do. And now we're going to go to the components, because there we can set up different variants and interactions to create the hover effect. So when we hover over this, it goes to that hover state. And then we're going to also optimize this for mobile and stuff like that. And now I want to say that last week's video was a masterclass about components. So if you are not going to understand something about variants, interactions, or variables, make sure to watch that video. It's going to be in the description as well. So yeah, let's turn this into a component. However, before that, I'm going to make a slight change, because as you can see, now this content frame has a bunch of these transforms: preserve 3D, origin, perspective, rotation, stuff like that. This is really much needed because that's how we're going to flip this, as you can see. So if we now turn this into a component, we're going to see a little issue. Now this main variant, which was the content frame, no longer has these transforms. And that's because this main, top level variant within components cannot have transforms, only the layers within. So I'm going to undo this. And a really simple fix for this is that we are just wrapping this content in a new frame. So I'm going to press Option, Command and Enter to wrap it in a stack, and we're going to rename it to Project Block. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to fit content, the height to fit content as well. Then we're going to change those to fixed. Then we're going to lock the aspect ratio, and then within the content will be set to fill width. And now in theory, this should be responsive, but we're going to check this. So let's just change the width And yeah, as you can see, it is nicely responsive, and we will be able to change the content rotation within to get this effect. But we will have to change the project block's overflow to visible, so the overflowing parts will be nicely visible. So now we can click the project block and turn this into a component, right click, create component, and then hit create. So now we are here on the component canvas, and we can define the different variants here. So this will be the default variant here. I'm going to rename it to default. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Option on my keyboard and drag it like this to create a hover state. And as we previously mentioned, we are just going to transform it along the X, rotate it like this, maybe minus 45 degrees. And this will be the hover state. So as you can see, it's very simple. Now we have these two variants. And what we can do is we can use interactions to add mouse enter and mouse leave interactions. So let's connect from default to hover. So we're going to go from default to hover on mouse enter. And then from hover to default, we're going to go with mouse leave. So we can take a look at this. As you can see, as I hover, we go to the hover state. If you want to specify a different transition, we can go to the primary variant on the right panel, transition, and then maybe 300, and then maybe decrease the damping a bit, have a little bounce there. Let's see how this looks. Preview, and you can see it looks pretty good. What I also want to do is I want to make sure that when I hover over this, we have a pointer cursor. So let's add the web cursor pointer here on the primary variant. Now if I hover, I have the pointer cursor. I hope that the screen recorder also records the cursor there. So now we have these, and as you can see, if I go back to the canvas, I can duplicate this card, set this main stack's direction to vertical, so these are placed right below each other. And so now I have these components that I can reuse multiple times for maybe a portfolio site for different projects. But there's a slight issue, and that's the fact that I cannot really customize the title and the logos for these individual components. So what do I do? Basically, that's where variables come in to make sure that these individual instances of this component are nicely customizable. So let's go within this component, and then let's select those different parts that needs to be customized individually for different instances. First one is the title. So I'm going to go and give the content property a plain text. Then I'm going to rename it to title. Then select this one here. This will be called, I don't know, type maybe. And then what else? I think we're going to also select the image within the peak frame. The field will be an image variable. It's really important that I'm adding these variables on the primary variant, so I'm not selecting the image here on the hover, because then it will only be added on the hover variant. And if I add it on the primary, it's added everywhere. And now we only have one logo here, so I'm going to bring in each and every one of these logos. So I'm going to select them, copy, and then go within and paste it here. So I think I have to paste it within the content like this. And then all of these logos, so let me just get them right below each other here on the layers panel. I'm going to select them and then hit Option, Command and Enter, then Shift and A. This will make sure that this stack is fitting its width and height. And then this will be called logos. And so what we're going to do here is we will basically hide and show each logo. So for example, here in this card, we're going to show this logo, so the rest will be hidden. And we can assign variables for these as well, for the visible property. So this first logo can have a variable for its visible property. We're going to call this 7 logo, and then we're going to select the next logo. I don't even know which one. Yeah, it's OP1D. So visible, create variable, OP1D logo. So what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to just come here to the properties panel and select which logo we want to display. So let's add the rest. So we're going to have a Volta, so visible, create variable volta, and then the last one will be meta. Great. So now as you can see, if we duplicate this card, we can get, for example, this volta charging. Just type in volta charging for the title, then product design for the type. Then we're going to change to the volta logo. So volta is shown, 7 logo is hidden. And we're going to also change to the different image. So I'm going to just drag and drop this other image, which is, I think, right here. Just drag and drop it. So now if you take a look at this, if I hover the top one, we see that image. And if I hover the bottom one, we will see the image for that component that we nicely specified through these component variables. So now I'm just going to quickly command ND, command ND, and command ND to duplicate them a couple of times. And then I'm going to customize each of these cards so we have these 5 components. So now I have all of these components nicely customized. Now we are not ready yet because when I first created this, I was like, okay, this looks great, but somehow I want to make sure that when a card or a block is hovered, the rest gets a bit darker. So we have like a highlighting effect that we only kind of highlight the one that we hover. So to make that, we can nicely practice event variables and maybe a little bit more interactions. So let's do that. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap all of these project blocks in a stack. So I'm going to select all of them and then Option, Command and Enter. And then I'm going to change the gap to around 20 or maybe 16 is enough. And then I'm going to call these blocks and then turn this into a component. So now what I can do is I can call these default. And also don't forget that we're going to optimize this component for mobile a little bit later. So I'm going to have this default state. And then for each hover state, I'm going to specify a variant for this component. So I'm going to add the first variant. I'm going to call it 1. Here, we're going to change the variant to hover. And here again, we have to set this primary variant to overflow visible to make sure that here this block is nicely visible when it is hovered. And so the rest can be a little bit decreased in opacity, maybe 0.5 or 0.4. And then I'm going to just do this for the rest of the variants as well. So here, for example, the second one will be hovered and the rest will be decreased in opacity. So I think we're done. As you can see, we have all of these variants. On each, a different block is hovered and the rest is a little bit decreased in opacity. So now we just have to add the interactions. But what I usually do in these cases is I remove the interaction from the project block because we're no longer going to need it because we're going to add the interactions on this component. Let's just remove these interactions from the project block component and go back to the blocks and then add these interactions here. So now we're going to use event variables here because as you can see, when I want to connect an interaction from this project block, I can, connect it from here. But when I connect it, you can see that I can select mouse enter, for example. But then if I connect again, I cannot really specify a new trigger. But what I would need is I would need a mouse enter and then a mouse leave as well. So instead of this approach of like connecting from here, we're going to first go within this component. What we're going to do here is we're going to go to interactions and then we're going to create a new event. This will be called mouse enter or just enter. Then we're going to go here and change it to mouse enter for the trigger. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the hover variant. Here we're going to remove the enter event. And then we're going to add a new event here, which will be called leave. And this will happen on mouse leave. So now we have 2 events that are happening and triggering. One is called enter. It's triggering on mouse enter on the default variant. And one is triggering on the hover variant and when we leave that specific variant. So now if you go back to the blocks component and we click each of these components, we can see that we now have the enter and leave events here as properties. where we can specify the different interactions that we want to execute when these triggers happen. So I'm going to click here to the enter. When enter event happens, we go to the first variant because that's where the first block is hovered. Then on leave, we will go to the default. And we're going to do this for each of these cards. And it's really important that I'm doing it on the default variant just to make sure that it is being applied to each and every other variant. So I don't have to go over each and every variant to add these interactions because that would be not great. So this will be going to the fourth variant, back to default, and this will be going to the fifth variant on hover, and then when we leave it, we will go back to default. Now, as you can see, it works perfectly. We go to the variants on interactions. So now, before I do anything, I just want to select all of these cards, set them to width fill, and I'm going to add a max width of 700 pixels. So they're not going to grow bigger than that. Then I'm going to also add a little padding here, so 20 on the sides. And now if we take a look at this, you'll see that as I resize the site, it will nicely be, responsive, and we'll have that max width of 700 pixels. However, we see a little problem here. When we go into mobile breakpoint, it doesn't really look great. What we're going to do is we're going to specify a phone variant for these blocks. And on phone, we're not going to have the hover because we cannot have hover on mobile, and we're going to have a bit different layout. So we cannot fit everything into it. So yeah, let's just go within the component. So this individual project block, I'm going to just drag and create a new variant, which will be called phone. And then to prepare for this phone optimization, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this title and the product innovation, so the type which is in the center. So I'm going to select them, Command D, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set them both to relative positioning. Then I'm going to wrap them in a stack. And so now they're grouped together. We're going to call this mobile, so we know that we need to show this on mobile. The direction will be vertical and the gap will be 0. Then the alignment to the left, and each of these within will fill up the available space. So maybe you're a bit confused because now everything is shown twice, the title and the type here, but we can just hide this mobile here on the default. So just go and hide it. And now here on the phone variant, we can just select these two, hide them, and then only show the mobile. So set it to visible, yes. So now as you can see, we have a mobile optimized version. So if this width will be a little bit smaller here, it's going to be nicely optimized. However, here we might want to change the aspect ratio lock because we will no longer need this because we have to keep somewhat of a bigger height. So let's change the height to maybe 80 pixels. And then the content within will also get unlocked from this, and then 80 pixels here as well. We don't really have to care about the image here because, as I said, we're not going to have the hover effect here. And by the way, what I want to say is that if you want to add links to these cards, you can just go to the default primary variant and add the link here. And this can be also a variable. So we can create a link variable here. And then here we will be able to select these cards and then add a link to them. So yeah, now all we have to do is to create a different variant here, which will be called phone, and select all of these and set them to phone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect this lock and set it to fit. Then I'm going to also remove all of these interactions because, as you might already know, all of the interactions added on the default primary variant are added anywhere else, everywhere else, and anywhere else. Which is also great. I said that it's perfect for us, but sometimes it's not great because we have to remove this in some cases. So let's just go and click through these components and remove their interactions. So now if we preview this, we will not have any sort of like interactions or hover effect when we hover over these. All we have to do now is to go to the phone breakpoint and select the phone variant. Now, if we preview this, you're gonna see that on desktop, we have a perfect kind of effect, an interaction. If you add this to a portfolio site, every one of your friends will be like, wow, how did you do that? So you're gonna be able to impress your friends with this, which is pretty cool. And then what we have on mobile is an optimized version. So if we change this width to a little bit smaller, you're gonna see that it nicely adapts to this mobile view. Perfect. So that's it for this video. I hope that this little exercise was great for you to practice components, variants, and interactions. Also, check out Framer.University. It's basically the daily hub for every Framer learner, or basically anyone who is building websites with Framer. It has a bunch of tutorials, components, and remixes all for free. So yeah, check it out. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.